Our speakers this evening are Sheila Jeffries and Nicole Jones. Our first speaker, Sheila Jeffries, taught sexual politics at the University of Melbourne for 25 years. She is the author of 10 books on the history and politics of sexuality, including The Lesbian Revolution, which comes out on the 29th of August. Her book, Gender Hurts, a feminist analysis of the politics of transgenderism, was published in 2014. I give you Sheila Jeffries. Yay!
Thanks, everybody. What I'm going to talk about tonight is how important it is to think internationally when dealing with the threat posed by men's cross-dressing activism, commonly called the transgender rights movement, to women's human rights. Now, I fear there may not be as much humour in my talk tonight as some would wish, because it's a big and complicated and quite serious subject. But I'm going to do my very best to explain it as clearly as I can. In the UK, the feminist resistance has been growing exponentially in the last year, with excellent effect against men's cross-dressing rights and the way that they erase the rights of women. But we concentrated on the UK manifestation of cross-dressing rights. We've been looking at the tip of the iceberg and not noticing the growing, powerful international men's rights movement that supports what trans rights activists are demanding in this country. There's a huge international human rights campaign backing the local trans rights activism, and it features powerful individual and corporate donors, a range of very influential human rights organisations, many dedicated entirely to trans rights, and a variety of important documents that do not yet have any force in law but are increasingly recognised internationally as human rights best practice. To show how far along the agenda of gender rights has come, in March this year, the EU Parliament adopted a report on fundamental rights in the EU, which condemns states which require any kind of medical evidence to support change of gender. They call it psychiatric consent. And the document argues for the depathologization of transgenderism and self-identification of gender. In other words, it condemns, because it condemns countries that demand any evidence, Britain, because it's got the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, which requires some medical evidence before a man can just sign a form saying that he's actually a woman. Now, the document states that what it calls transgender people do not have a mental illness, but it requires that these people should have easy access to medical treatment such as surgery. It's not entirely clear why they should have access to the treatment since they're not suffering from any kind of illness, but these sort of interesting contradictions do appear. Now, this document about fundamental rights doesn't have a legal weight. It's not been changed into what would be in the EU a directive, but this could happen very quickly, and it looks as if we will know nothing about it, because it does seem as if we don't get information about such changes in the UK. There doesn't seem to be a consultation on these sorts of things. It's just a fait accompli. Now, the document, the fundamental rights document, covers just about everything. It covers rights of migrants, it covers rights of children, it's against sexual harassment, and in the middle is slipped this section on gender rights. So I think what happens is, because this was passed in the European Parliament, is that people are bamboozled and boggle-eyed about all of this. They think rights are a very good idea. They don't look for the sentence that got something rather strange that they don't necessarily understand. And also, as you're very aware, because so-called gender identity rights have been piggybacked onto gay and lesbian rights, in all of the documents that I'm talking about tonight, human rights activists professionals feel automatically they must sign on to any of these documents. How? How could they stand out against lesbian and gay rights? So I think that's the situation, is that these things are being slipped through or added on in ways which make it very difficult for feminists internationally, even if they're looking, and I think most of the time they haven't been, to see what is going on or to oppose it. Now these sorts of developments, which are happening thick and fast, and mostly without the knowledge or scrutiny of any feminists, are happening on the basis of something called the Yogyakarta Principles. They're called the Yogyakarta Principles because that's where they were signed and created in 2007 in Indonesia. They were updated in 2017 with 10 extra principles, which are called the plus 10 of the Yogyakarta Principles. They are signed by a range of heavyweight human rights campaigners, lawyers, and functionaries. The signees include some important feminist human rights campaigners, and I suspect that these women signed because the principles constitute a charter of human rights for lesbians and gay men. So they would automatically think that's very important and sign onto it. And they may very well think, and I should argue tonight that this is a very serious problem, that gender identity is somehow connected with homosexuality, and that therefore these things should necessarily go together. And the problem for us is how the hell we are going to pull them apart. They are unlikely to have known the implications of the whole half of the Yogyakarta Principles that relate to gender identity. Now, the section of the principles which relates to gay rights is very important. It's a very necessary development. It's much lauded by lesbian and gay activists and others in the human rights community. The problem with the principles, though, is that they yoke together lesbian and gay rights with the right to protection and expression. We'll have more about that later. Would any of you like to express a gender identity at me now? Very puzzling to know what to do. Most seems to include things like hair flicking. That's very, very important. And I looked up hair flicking online, and apparently it's something that women do to show men they're interested in them. They go. It's a great puzzle, but I haven't been heterosexual for a long time, and maybe I So, the problem with the Yogyakarta Principles is they yoke together lesbian and gay rights with this thing called expression of gender identity, and they call for the protection of something called gender rights. Now, as you all know, because you're an extremely sophisticated audience, gender is the opposite of sex. Sex is biology, and it's on the basis of biology that women are oppressed. And on the basis of biology, the women have gained rights and become a protected category in some jurisdictions and in international law. So it's absolutely crucial in international law that sex is actually the basis of recognition of women's rights. It was actually Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of the president, who in 1946, the birth of the United Nations, got the word sex in there. It wouldn't have been in there otherwise. She was a good feminist and a good lesbian. So we have the word in there. Even though she was married to a man, I have to tell you. So the notion of gender identity explodes all of this work to create women's rights, recognise women's rights on the basis of biology and sex, and it endangers the very notion of women's rights as human rights worldwide. Gender identity rights are the triumph of a couple of decades of campaigning by men who cross-dress for sexual excitement, in particular, who have managed to sellotape their sexual interests onto the rights of lesbians and gay men. The idea of gender arises from the oppression of women and cannot exist without it, and gender comprises the behaviour and appearance norms required of men and women. Gender does not exist in most languages in the world. It's extraordinary that it is used in the UN, and most people have no idea what it means. The concept of gender identity is an entirely American concept of now that exists in the English language. That's very important. When you're hearing the phrases that I'm going to talk about tonight, think, what the hell do they mean in Indonesia and in the Philippines? They don't mean anything at all. They're a particular kind of American cultural imperialism coming through these documents and through this extraordinary language. So what is gender? Femininity, of course, is one half of gender, and it's the enforced behaviour of the oppressed, that is women, and it includes humiliating clothing norms such as high heels, depilation, body exposure, body covering, the restriction of body movement, taking up not much space, and so on. And it's based on the idea that women's brains are somehow different from those of men, in which ways which make them suited to such behaviour and make them rightfully subordinate and suited to doing the housework. Now, masculinity is the behaviour of the powerful. It includes taking up space, the expression of confidence and control of boundaries in the form of striding, wearing dignified clothing, and not cleaning the toilet. Now, gender comprises the behaviour of two groups of people in a hierarchy of oppression: the subordinates, women, and the dominants, men. The notion of gender identity makes gender, i.e. the behaviours of a system of oppression, into something natural and inevitable. It eradicates a 5-decade feminist struggle to eradicate gender, which was previously, and I think more clearly, called sex roles, because that brings the housework in more clearly, I do feel. And it meant things like chivalry and so on, all that kind of rather old-fashioned stuff we thought we'd got rid of, to be honest with you. Now, the Avocado Principals bring it back. They don't have any force in law, but they and their notion of gender are increasingly very influential in international law. Though most feminists probably have no idea that they exist. We have to know this now. They arise from a campaign by cross-dressing men to promote and protect masochistic sexual obsession. Now let me look at what came before the Avocado Principles and what was incorporated into them. There's a bit of a history to this. I've called this talk the protection of men's sexual rights in international law, because the idea of what are now called transgender or gender identity rights come from men with a sexual interest in cross-dressing. Cross-dressing, which has also been called transvestism, is what's called in sexology, which is the so-called science of sex, paraphilia. Paraphilias are more commonly called, or were, sexual perversions when they're not being discussed scientifically. Men who cross-dress are masochists who are sexually excited by impersonating what they see as the subordinate class, that is, women. Their extensive pornography and support sites online make this clear. Some brave sexologists who are prepared to face the vicious abuse they receive for their scientific analysis say this too. And they provide a great deal of evidence from their years of clinical work with these men. The majority of these men, who are the heterosexual men, there isn't some kind of essence of gender which falls on them when they're walking down the street. There has to be a reason why they think they have a gender identity. And it's this explanation in terms of sexual fetishism, which both the science of sex and all the evidence you can find online. You might want to go and look at some of the underwear sites, for instance, and so on. There's plenty of evidence for the sexual motivation. 10% of pornography is transgender erotica, which is all directed at satisfying the sexual desires of cross-dressers to experience the humiliation of being feminized, most often forcefully or by accident, as in my favourite story, which is called Gender Swapped by Aliens. There is evidence too on the websites that sell men lycra bodysuits or body parts to masturbate into. And the fetishistic aspects of cross-dressing are obvious in the interest these men have in pretending to menstruate. I find this a particularly interesting one. Transgender discussion boards address whether pads or tampons are better. It's hard to know where they put them. But now some men put red substances on the pads they wear to be more realistic. This is gender identity. Right? It's huge out there, and just a little bit of research will find it. You will discover that there is a huge amount of pushback against men who cross-dress, against any of us knowing that it's based in sexual interest, and in fact lots of women indeed wish to be polite and not mention the sex. Don't talk about the sex, don't talk about the sex. But I do think that we actually need to do that. So gender identity is the eroticizing for these men of women's subordination, the protection of what is now promoted as human rights best practice. It's male cross-dressers who have campaigned for gender rights. The lesbians and the women who are transgendered are almost entirely lesbians. They're straightened out by brutal drug regimes and surgeries of transgenderism. They're made straight by these terrible forms of medical violence. And the children who are severely harmed, the vast majority of whom are girls who are, as the sexologists say, same-sex attracted, in other words, young lesbians, they are the collateral damage of what is overwhelmingly a men's sexual rights movement. And in fact, the transgender activists, a decade or so ago, were desperate to get more and more women coming out as transgender because they thought it would hide the sexual motivations that they're interested in. And the same with promoting the transgendering of children, because if children are doing it, it can't be about the sex. Now, the history of cross-dressing then, how did it move into the Avocado Principles? Well, men's cross-dressing for sexual excitement has a long history. But before the second half of the 20th century, these men did not say they were really women. They mostly cross-dressed for special parties or on cross-dressing weekends or in secret. The development of hormones, surgical techniques, the idea promoted by psychiatrists, endocrinologists and surgeons that sex could actually be changed, encouraged some men to think they could become women. And the medical profession developed the idea of sex change, particularly to cure homosexuality in men. Because psychiatrists believe that homosexual men must somehow really be women and have women's brains in men's bodies. And the first man who underwent full treatment in the US was a homosexual man who called himself Christine Jorgensen. Now, the cross-dressing activists started to organise together in support organisations in the 60s and 70s, the Beaumont Society in London, for instance. In the 1990s, the development of the internet enabled the creation of a political movement of cross-dressers who created a Charter of Rights, which was the basis of the Avocado Principles, asserting their rights to be recognised legally as women and access to all spaces and resources assigned to women. Now, these desires were set out, first of all, in 1995, or set out as an international bill in 1995 by a group of men in the US, and it was titled the International Bill of Transgender Rights. It was just a wish list as to how they would like their sexual fantasies to be accommodated and protected by the state. It had, of course, no standing in law, and may have seemed outlandish to many at the time. Actually, I suspect nobody knew about it except this particular little group of what they call, I think, hobbyists. The fetishists often call themselves hobbyists. But these men's demands have now been incorporated in domestic law in many countries and are being campaigned for with considerable success in international fora through the vehicle of the Avocado Principles. The man who claims to have authored the original Bill of Gender Rights before it was international, in 1990, calls himself Joanne Roberts. He's an occasional cross-dresser. He doesn't claim to be a woman. He says, I'm a cross-dresser, divorced and remarried with 2 adult children. He organises cross-dressers' weekends getaways. So this is, we need to go back this way. We need to do a little bit of this forensic examination to find out where this extraordinary atrocity of gender rights actually came from. The other main figure in creating the bill is a very masculine man who pretends to be a woman, and he calls himself Phyllis Fry. He's a judge in the US. He reels off streams of his qualifications as incredibly masculine, the most masculine man you could possibly imagine. He was in the Cadet Corps, he was in the US Army, etc., etc., etc. And then one day in the street he was struck down by the gender essays. A lot of the men who do this are extraordinarily masculine men, and they have children. It was in middle age that they decided to do this. Now, the first right in the bill that Phyllis and Joanne created states that all human beings have the right to define their own gender identity. The term is in there. It comes from sexology. It comes from the doctors of sex. Regardless of chromosomal sex, genitalia, assigned sex, birth sex, or initial gender role. So you've got most of the languages in there, right, back in 1995 from the cross-dressers. The other rights concern these men's posturing as women in public places and women's spaces, and their right to cosmetic surgery to acquire their desired body shape, and so on. The International Bill of Transgender Rights provided the template for what became 10 years later the gender identity rights section of the Avocado Principles. The coup the cross-dressers were able to accomplish in the intervening years was the piggybacking of their sexual fetish rights onto the rights of lesbians and gay men, so that cross-dressing rights came to be seen as similar to lesbian and gay rights and in some way inseparable to them. Now, the Avocado Principles create a clash with women's rights. I'll just give you a few details about what's in those principles themselves, which, as I said, it's very clear. It's the same language from the 1990s that you will see replicated here. The definition of gender identity is founded, it's founded on the notion that something called gender is not an oppressive social construction, which feminists understand, and that is imposed as a basis of male domination, but some kind of natural or innate condition. It says this is the Avocado Principles. Gender identity, whatever the hell that is understood to refer to each person's deeply felt internal individual experience of gender. How many of you here don't have a gender? Quite a lot. So you are against the principles, I think, before you even begin.
We are.
You are, yes. You're not even represented here with these people without gender. No. So, in each person, so you've got to have one, deeply felt, internal, and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth, including the personal sense of the body, which may involve your freely chosen modifications of bodily appearance or function by medical, surgical, or other means. And other expressions of gender, including dress, speech, and mannerisms. Society claim that the mannerisms are, I think, things like sort of simpering and doing little steps and all of that. And what the hell is gender expression? Do you ever do it? I don't know, maybe I'm a man because I put my hands in my pockets. I mean,
on a Friday.
Sorry?
Only on a Friday.
On a Friday. I put my hands in my pockets. It is absolutely extraordinary stuff. This is now best practice in international law. Right? I think it is indeed. I think it's camp language as well, which has got a long tradition in the history of gay men's culture. Drag stuff, a particular kind of high-mixing voice that goes on in drag culture, which is very insulting to women, but a very important part of that history. The site online, which you probably might want to look at to tell you about the hair flicking and the flirtation, it's called Ask Men. Ask Men. Lots of really good stuff on there. So if anything you're ever talking about gender, look at Ask Men and it will explain it. It's the mansplaining site. Our evidence, but the Avocado Principles demand that there should be no evidence. So it does. This means that any man who cross-dresses on the weekend, indeed, or Friday, and makes no changes to his appearance, retains both penis and beard, can be legally recognised as a woman if he demands this. We're very aware now, I think, of how far this has gone and how possible all of this is. As one example of how influential the Avocado Principles are, they are being cited in the projected new legislation in Scotland, which will allow men to self-identify as women as justification for that. The document says the view of the Scottish Government is that the 2004 Act requirements are unnecessarily intrusive and do not reflect the best practice now embodied in the Avocado Principles. So the hair flicking is best practice now. Now, the extent to which the YPs are now embodied in international law is evident in the adoption in 2015 of Resolution 2048 by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. PACE resolutions do not have the force of law in the EU, but resolutions do usually get adopted by the EU in time. It's specifically about protection of what it calls transgender people from violations of rights, but states that the Assembly welcomes the emergence of a right to gender identity and supports self-identification of gender without complex procedures. So this is going everywhere. So, what chance not getting self-identification in the UK when this is going on? The influence of the YPs at the UN is clear. 2016 resolution of the Human Rights Council. The resolution entitled Protection Against Violence and Discrimination Based on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. This established the position for a period of 3 years of an independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And how this person is supposed to understand what gender identity might possibly mean, I have no idea, because it is never, gender is never, ever defined. None of these documents have a definition of what the hell gender is. Presumably they feel they don't need to. There are no definitions in the resolution, and so on. And there's no recognition there's any controversy around any of this. Now, lesbian rights and gender. As a lesbian feminist, I'm extremely aware of the need for the protection of the rights of lesbians and gay men internationally. The rights of lesbians and gays need to be separated off from the rights of heterosexual male cross-dressers if the rights of lesbians and all other women are to be protected. The YPs, as far as they're concerned, lesbian and gay rights are much needed. And it's very unfortunate that they are compromised and undermined by the creation of rights for mainly heterosexual men who cross-dress and impersonate women. But the definition they give of the lesbian is extremely problematic in the Avocado Principals, and it's one which very many lesbians would fundamentally disagree with. Lesbians are defined as women who sexually, physically, and romantically feel attracted to individuals of the same gender. This is the definition of the lesbian in international law. I don't have a gender. How would I know whether I was supposed to be attracted to someone of the same gender? So it leaves me in a very difficult position. Who should I be attracted to? Now, I have no idea. So, now gender is, of course, is a social construction which underpins male dominance. Lesbians are not attracted to women because they're feminine, i.e. because they wear makeup and they walk with small steps, but because they are women and biologically women. So the YP definition of the lesbian is extremely destructive to lesbian pride and lesbian rights. It supports the notion that a man who says he has the gender identity of a woman can claim to be a lesbian and demand sex from lesbians, as so many do right now. Although I may end up having difficulty with it. They do not. Now, the YPs are completely contradictory and confusing in the way in which they employ the word gender. When placed in front of the word identity, it means any person's belief that they have some essential personality traits normally found in the opposite sex. When employed to describe lesbians, it probably means sex, but this is completely unclear. We have no idea what it means. But nobody feels the need to define any of this anywhere. And it is now the basis of what is being promoted and what is being adopted in national and international legal systems. Now, lesbian and gay rights in the UN. Now, the principles were the result of decades of campaigning for the recognition of lesbian and gay rights in international law. There was no chance that our rights would be created into a United Nations Convention, because powerful blocs of nations, such as the Muslim countries and the Organisation of Islamic States and so on, and strictly Catholic ones, would never allow that. I attended the 2000 CEDAW Convention on the Rights of Women conference in New York, which goes alongside the NGO conferences alongside the CEDAW conference. The 2000 conference was called Beijing Plus 10 because it was 10 years after the groundbreaking Fourth World Conference on Women, out of which came the Beijing Declaration and Beijing Platform for Action, which were really the high point. It was 1995, that was the high point. We haven't really gotten anywhere since then. At the 2000s conference, there were Christian churches and Islamic organisations, because when you sign up to be accredited and go to CEDAW, you can take as many people as you like. So there were churches from the Midwest in America with 50 representatives. There would be one woman representing the whole of West Africa because it couldn't possibly afford to go to New York. That's the kind of situation that was happening at CEDAW. And the representatives from the Christian and Muslim organisations stood in medieval costume in the corridors. We had never seen men there before. I mean, it was just extraordinary. Men and boys did not go to CEDAW, but they were there, huge numbers of them. The Catholic schoolboys had highly polished shoes. They were running down the corridors, being directed by men with sort of ropes round their middles and open-toed sandals and long robes, to go and pursue the young lesbians and gays who were trying to have meetings and find out where they were. I went to a lesbian and gay meeting where there actually were speakers, and the schoolboys were at the back of the room doing their rosaries, kicking their rosaries with terror at what was going on the stage. So the situation is that there was never going to be a convention that included lesbian and gay rights. That was never ever going to happen. Or abortion rights, because they were dead against both of those things. So the lesbian and gay organisations themselves were not accredited by ECOSOC and allowed in CEDAW till 2007. They are there now, and they are now going to the CEDAW conference and obviously pushing for their language, which is the opposite of and eliminates language related to women. Now, the creation of the YPs was very astute politically as far as lesbian and gay rights are concerned, because the lesbian and gay activists realised that there was no way they were going to get a convention. They could not get rights in that way. So what they needed to do, and what they did do, was create another document which has no force in law, but is now enormously influential in law, outside the UN system, but in all the same ways, using the same kind of language and having the same kind of experts and so on, so that it looks like something terribly official and terribly important. And that's what they did in 2007 with the Avocado Principals. It was a very sensible thing to do. I have no objection to it. I think it's great, except that it is attached to gender identity. So, what is the connection between sexual orientation and gender identity? The YPs and the many documents that have stemmed from them entwine sexual orientation and gender identity so closely that they have one short acronym which incorporates both and is now wielded in human rights campaigning. It is SOGI. S-O-G-I, sexual orientation, gender identity. Right? I mean, the extraordinary thing is that so many of us don't know any of this. In the whole of the international human rights community, they're using this language all the time now. This is the language there. In some countries, in its plural form, it's SOGIs. Right? You all need to know this, and you need to be looking out for the language. So it's no longer possible to campaign for lesbian and gay rights without automatically triggering the promotion of identity rights. Now, SOGI, the International Service for Human Rights, one of the huge NGOs, powerful NGOs campaigning for all of these rights, it says the phrase SOGI now rolls off the tongue quite easily. There you are. Yet before the Avocado Principals were formulated, the language in international law focused solely on sexual orientation. So yes, they're saying that the Avocado Principals have got gender identity in there, and now SOGI is the way to go. It's a strange language, isn't it? Now, this is a tremendous blow to lesbians who badly need human rights protections. To give but one example, lesbians in South Africa are relentlessly raped and murdered in a state which ignores any responsibility. And right now, we cannot campaign to support them without also promoting the rights of heterosexual male cross-dressers to take over women's spaces and opportunities. What an extraordinary situation to have reached. And it's not lesbians who have dominated campaigning for gay rights, but gay men. So the question of why gayness and gender identity have been wrapped up together in this extremely unfortunate way is an important one. It's not lesbians who campaign for this. Historically, gay men have been understood culturally and by the sexologists, the scientists of sex, as having the brains of women and the bodies of men, as having something to do with femininity, because they were failed men, not real men, and real men would be masculine. So gay men are the default position. They've been seen as socially subordinate and for sexual use by other men, as women are. Gay men have pretended to be women as comedy acts to entertain their peers in gay clubs and bars for decades. Drag is a perennial feature of gay male culture. There's no such tradition in lesbian culture, though some lesbians briefly tried to do something called drag kinging in the 1990s, and it was absolutely not the same sort of thing. It's not in lesbian culture. Now, the old canon that homosexuality was a result or manifestation of men and women having the brains of the opposite sex, mysteriously transplanted into their bodies, was fiercely rejected by the gay liberation movement and lesbian feminism. But these movements declined, drag did not. In countries all over the world, there's never been any challenge to the idea that gay men are somehow female or feminine. I suspect that it is for these reasons that the men campaigning for gay rights have weighted themselves to gender identity rights. These gay men recognise that many of their communities see themselves as failed men, reduced to the status of women, and wish to support them. Now, the International Service for Human Rights, which is one of these big organisations, says that sexual orientation and gender identity have been placed on the same plane, and he says it's because LGBT defenders from the global south, for whom said that such an inclusion was non-negotiable. So what's happened is that the protection of gay rights in countries in which there's been severe harassment of gay men and no concept of gay pride could be seen as requiring the protection of cross-dressing, because so many gay men, particularly those in prostitution, do this. They do cross-dress. So there was no consideration of the implications of the promotion of gender identity rights for women. Women were not in their field of vision, drag queens were. Now, something about American imperialism and how these ideas of femininity and homosexuality in the global south are constructed. Since the 1990s, the concept of transgenderism was promoted internationally through NGOs working on issues such as HIV/AIDS and gay rights. It's been used to refer to men who are prostituted by other men in both the US and in other countries. It's only just reached Pakistan. There's beginning to be the transgendering of men in prostitution to other men in Pakistan. All of this is fairly recent, but it's moving fast. The way it moves is the American organizations put the money out to organizations which will use that language and promote the idea of transgenderism. So men in prostitution to other men in different parts of the world, heteros, ladyboys, etc., never thought that they were actually women, but they're now being told they must do so because the concept of gender identity, they don't usually have the concept of gender or gender identity in most countries, is now being promoted by these channels through the money internationally in a way which is quite extraordinary. Even in Pakistan now, there are even some lesbians having their breasts off, which they never would have thought before to do. There was a program on the BBC about it, because now they're accepting this notion, this cultural American notion of transgenderism, which is saying they can't really be lesbians, they have their breasts off. Now, who campaigns for gender identity rights? The many NGO campaigning are influential, they're well funded, with impressive and professional websites. The groups that campaigned for the YPs originally were the International Service for Human Rights, and something called Hubigda. What happened was that in 1979, the hospital that did most of the transgender operations and surgery in America said it was not going to do any more because it didn't think that there was a good outcome. The doctors who've been involved in that went off and became something called WPATH, World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They joined with these other human rights organisations. They were behind the campaigning for the YPs. Now, the suppression of women's and feminist speech, I need to be quick. I will speak. Fine. Okay. Now, suppression of women's and feminist speech is a problem, I think, in the YPs, because they call upon states parties to take all appropriate action to achieve the elimination of prejudicial or discriminatory attitudes or behaviours which are related to the idea of the inferiority or superiority of any sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression. I could indeed tonight here be guilty of this, because I do think that women who are biologically female are women and men are not. So therefore I could find myself flagrantly in breach of this clause. So it would make the expression by a woman of her opinion that she was more of a woman than a man and address into a form of potentially actionable prejudice. It augurs ill for the sort of free speech we as feminists are demanding and expressing at this meeting, for instance. Now, the plus 10, which were the ones added in 2017. The YPs have created a new language and thus a new way of thinking about human rights. Women's human rights are based upon recognition of the category of sex, which is the sine qua non of women's rights. But they don't mention these in the YPs or the plus 10, so sex pretty much disappears. But what they have got in the plus 10, but not in the original YPs, so the language gets more and more interesting as they progress. I don't know any of it's going to do in a court of law. But they've got something called sex characteristics. There's no sex anymore, there's sex characteristics, which mean you might be, unfortunately, the possessor of a penis, I suspect, in a women's lavatory, and somebody might say, there you are, a man, and they can be able to say under this, well, no, I just happen to have a sex characteristic. It's nothing particularly to do with who I am. I presume that's what it is. It's not explained why sex characteristics pops up, but it does say that it is the biology, right? The biology bit is now called sex characteristics. It says include primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics, e.g. muscle mass, hair distribution and stature. So another a man could look exactly like a large and bearded man with a penis, but those are just sex characteristics and nothing to be worried about. Now, they absolutely don't explain why they want to include any of this. The old-fashioned term sex, which is the basis of women's rights, the term sexual characteristics is necessary, I suspect, to protect cross-dressing men in their predilections. The plus 10 went further than the original principles in emphasising and giving more detail to demands made by men who cross-dress to take over women's space and opportunities. There's more detail, for instance, about the way in which men must be included in women's sports in the plus 10. So basically what happened between 2007 and 2017 was that men increased their demands, increased what they understood that they should have. Right? Lest we think that lesbians who transgender are included in any of this, clearly they're not. I think women and lesbians are not trying to be in men's sports, so it becomes clear who's behind the YPs when they go on about sport in this way. Women are not in any way advantaged by any of this. They're not going to win. Another thing which I noticed was popped in was surrogacy. It wasn't in 2007 YPs, but in 2017 plus 10 there's rights to found a family including surrogacy, which has been a particular demand in international campaigning by some gay men, it has to be said. Okay, so I will conclude. Women's rights are being overthrown or subject to challenge in such a whirlwind and significant way at the moment, it's urgent we work out how to fight back. And most women don't even know about any of this, let alone being in a position to fight back. What is the best way to challenge this international takeover by men's sexual rights of the human rights sphere? And it is a massive takeover. And the trans rights organisations are attending CEDAW to fight for their language and their interests. So one thing I suggest is that women must be there. And this means getting into a women's organisation that already challenges trans rights, and not many do, and is a recognised NGO able to send representatives to CEDAW, or setting up our own organisation so we can apply for accreditation with CEDAW, which is not too complicated, and go there to challenge the trans push. This is very expensive. Travel and accommodation in New York costs a lot of money, and all the well-funded trans and gay organisations and churches find this no problem. It will be a problem for us as to how we get there. In Europe, I suggest we need to be lobbying MEPs and the Women's Group in the European Parliament, which has been good in the past, and the European Women's Lobby. And I'm open to many, many other suggestions because I think we are in an urgent situation. So that's it for now.
Moving swiftly on. Well, our next speaker is Nicole Jones, and she's a student and feminist activist. It's all yours, Nicole.
In 1697, 20-year-old Edinburgh student Thomas Aikenhead was the last person in the UK to be executed for blasphemy. Now, blasphemy is passé. Institutions have adopted the handy euphemism violent and disorderly conduct, or hate speech, to cover their tracks from persecuting or reprimanding speech they believe to be unholy. To illustrate my point, I have taken the passage from Aikenhead's 1696 indictment and modernised it simply by replacing the word prisoner with TERF and the scriptures with transgender ideology. The TERF has repeatedly maintained in conversation that transgender ideology is stuffed with such madness, nonsense and contradictions that she admired the world being so long deluded by it. The protests that surround events that we need to talk I have only ever seen before in the context of blasphemy. One example is the protest of Richard Thomas and Stuart Lee play Jerry Springer of the Opera, in which hundreds of religious protesters gather outside the BBC buildings to protest their decision to air the show, calling for senior staff to be sacked. If it sounds familiar, it's because the tactics are the same. Pious, blue-haired believers frequently take to the streets with pots and pans in an attempt to deny us the right to assembly, association and free speech. Astoundingly, Venice's event in Bristol was the first event on this topic to go ahead in the advertised venue. On the topic of the BBC, last year, broadcaster Jenny Murray was issued with an impartiality warning after writing an article critical of the dogmatic rhetoric that trans women are women. According to the BBC, what women are is a controversial topic for a woman to speak on. As any woman who has publicly or personally criticised transgender ideology will be aware, this is a relatively unremarkable response. The climate surrounding discussion on the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act and equality law is depressing in its likeness to the Harry Enfield sketch, Women Know Your Limits. Equally unremarkable is the chorus of LGBT charities condemning the content as if they actually represent us. Stonewall's campaign manager, Rachel Cohen, responded to the article with the following: "They are women, just like you and me, and their sense of their gender is as ingrained in their identity as is yours or mine. Now the assumption that my sense of my gender is ingrained in my identity is telling. This person is clearly a believer." She goes on to say, "Whether you are trans or not, your identity is yours alone. I do not question your identity, Jenny, and in return I wouldn't expect you to question mine or anyone else's. What right do you have to do so?" An argument constructed on a sense of a gender that is yours alone cannot be challenged because it's self-referential. In one video, non-binary YouTuber Avocado breaks down crying on the phone to her mother she comes out as transgender. She describes her identity as going beyond clothes and roles, saying it's just like an internal sense. Her mother can't dispute this, of course. No one can dispute this. Similarly, Christians who purport to have a personal relationship with God cannot be challenged because their evidence is their own conviction. Can you prove that they don't have a personal relationship with God? Can you prove that Ash doesn't feel as if she's neither male or female? Conviction, or words to that effect, make up the diagnostic criteria for transgenderism. Currently, you must receive a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and live for 2 years as your desired gender before you can get a gender recognition certificate. Consistent, persistent, and insistent is a phrase used in regard to transgender children. Self-identification, the process of merely filling in a form to change your legal status, removes the requirement of conviction. We are told it is a human rights violation that the only quantifiable evidence that we have for determining if someone is transgender is intrusive. The form does include a declaration of intent to live a lifetime as the desired gender, but requires no proof. We must have faith. Surgery and hormones are not superfluous. Identity alone is sufficient. Much to the delight of an increasingly privatised NHS, self-identification will result in an increased transgender population with a decreased ease of access to the medications and procedures that were once seen as crucial by this community. If it takes nothing to be transgender, the government is required to give nothing to transgender people. This law is so ill-conceived, its supporters so blinded by their belief that they would rather spend their time intimidating women than investigating with us the long-term integrity of a law that affects them. Part of the prerogative to silence the debate is the unspoken acknowledgement that this law is in conflict with other rights. When we point out the logical fallacy that if a resource is available to anyone who identifies as X, the resource is available to everyone, we are apparently creating a false dichotomy. Belief or religion and gender identity are two protected characteristics that come into conflict with other rights. Gay marriage or sex-specific spaces do not come into conflict with providing disability access. They can, however, conflict with a person's belief or gender identity. That gender should be enshrined in law ought to be a concern for any secularist. Gender identity is a faith-based claim evidenced by your own conviction. It is not scientifically verifiable. That there is a male or female essence within us is as intellectually coherent as notions of a soul or Holy Spirit. And yet we are required as a courtesy to reflect this shared beliefs in our speech patterns, or we are guilty of the sin of misgendering. Women's boundaries are so negotiable, so easily disregarded that what constitutes our very being is open for subjective interpretation on part of those who are not us. What Kate Millett might describe as an ingenious form of interior colonisation, the use of preferred pronouns is a dynamic involving tacit agreement on part of the oppressed that the subjective interpretations, no matter how removed they are from our reality, are in fact correct. This reality is recontextualised as that of a cis woman. To most women, cis is as obvious a distortion of the truth as is Eve having come from Adam's rib. As shown in the case of Thomas Aikenhead hundreds of years ago, when you operate under faith, you are immunised from standard methods of reason, and therefore capable of anything. Together we must resist the modern-day scripture that is gender ideology. They can punch every tap.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Thank you. Now, I know there are a number of women in this room who would like to ask some questions and speak. And if anybody, if anybody would like to be on the live stream, you're not going to talk for 10 minutes now, Kate, are you? No, lovely. If you want to come up here and you want to be on the live stream, if any women want to speak from the floor, please go through me. I will be quite strict, but I will try and get as many women in as possible. But if you want to be on the live stream, if you come up, if not, I'll bring a mic to you and you can speak from the floor. Okay, so Kate. Yeah, Kate? You want to come up here?
Right, total privilege to be sitting here with Sheila Jeffries. Thank you very much for all your work over many years. I was also privileged to meet Andrea Dworkin and Mary Haley as well. And, it's easy to take each other for granted. Actually, this woman is a legend and a kind I really want to say. That history and that understanding is something that's got to be reiterated, I think. I want to say about 4 different things, okay? The first thing I want to say is that in the discussions that we've had on the media and that, in the UK anyway, there is this myth going around that there is this thing called gender dysphoria. Now, Sheila has spent years explaining to us that this trans ideology comes from porn, effectively. It comes from sexual fetish, and that's what it is. And it's dressed up as, literally dressed up as an innate sense of identity or whatever. But actually, what it is it's this fetishization of oppression. And I think they worship male supremacy by identifying as female and feminine. And obviously, some of the people who shall be named, who we've had conversation with recently, have made it quite clear that their pornographic interest in being fucked by other men is basically a major part of their identity. So why are women still talking to me online about supporting these poor souls who have gender dysphoria? Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Right. Let's ditch that crap for what it is, right? The next thing I want to say is about 2 or 3 different issues. You talked about soggy and this thing, sexual orientation. Now, I don't actually believe in sexual orientation. I'm in my late 50s, I've been a lifelong lesbian, and I've known many, many women in lots of different capacities, shall we say. Some of whom were very adamant about being lesbian, and they're now happily married. Well, I don't know, I imagine they're happily married to men with kids. And similarly, other women who, are in this room, who have been married, have kids, and are lesbian. Lesbian is a doing thing. It's something that we practice, right? It's something that we do. It's not, I don't think it's a sexual orientation. This notion of innate sexual orientation was adopted by men in America to justify themselves to the Western church, right? The Midwest churches who wanted to, what's that? Anyway, straighten them out, basically. And they said, we can't help it. We were born this way. And that worked as a strategy for them. I think it's absolute bullshit. So I think we need to get rid of the gender identity, but we need to get rid of the sexual orientation as well. And actually, what I support is one of our 7 demands, which is the right of every woman to a self-defined sexuality. That was one of the women's liberation, second wave 7 demands, and I still believe it's really, really important for each and every one of us to define what that could be. And lots of women have, Janice Raymond's written about there's lots of really good stuff out there on that. And what else? I think that might be it, actually. There was something else. Right, next up to Sweet Stick. Magdalene, you want to Hagen Burns.
Hello everyone. I haven't really got much to say because I thought the speakers were both great and they pretty much covered everything, so I'm just going to please.
Go in.
So anyway, I went to Edinburgh University and I got myself in a little bit of hot water with them for safe space violations. That's not shouting at me, I'm not even talking about what you... Can you stop shouting at me? I've got a microphone, you haven't, alright? So I'm going to be much louder than you. So anyway, I'm not talking about that, for God's sake. Anyway, so I just want to go on about what Sheila Jeffries is going on about. We need to be making making connections with women all over the world, women in Africa, women in Asia, women in South America. This problem is so huge in South America. We've got a massive movement, particularly in Brazil, of women pushing against this nonsense. We need to be talking to them, finding out what's going on in their countries, and really making connection, because this really is a global movement, a global push, and we need a global push back. We need to unify with women all over the world and try to connect with them and make sure that we don't get picked off one by one, because at the moment we're getting picked off one by one. Argentina, then Brazil, then the UK, all over the place. So we need to make sure they're coming at this internationally. We need to be resisting internationally. We need to be using all kinds of media. We need to be using Twitter, YouTube, every bit of media that we can get hold of, Instagram, to get our message across, and we need to do it as a collective. We need to meet up as well locally. We need to make sure that we set up groups in our local area with women, like-minded women. We campaign together locally. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you for listening.
Next up is in a minute, it's Lisa. Yeah. Round of applause for Lisa.
Right, I haven't prepared anything, but I'm going to talk anyway. To the shouty person, sorry. Yes, sorry. So I haven't prepared anything because I didn't know, but I'm going to talk anyway. To the shouty person, I'm used to dealing with toddlers, really. I want you to pick up on something that Sheila said about context and about the global context. And I want you to talk about why it is that women in the UK are particularly well placed to win this, and to win this easily. Now, I came through this from a very, very different route to other people. I worked in 2005 with sexual exploitation of girls in Keighley, which I think is now a national scandal.
Speak into the mic.
In 2005, I was working with sexual exploitation in Keighley, which I think we all now understand is a very serious problem. At that time, it was not a serious problem. At that time, it was by consent, completely. That was fine. We had systems that had been eroded over a very long time, and I had to accept in 2005 that our protection system was not functioning, and I left. This sounds like a terribly, terribly sad story, but here is something that I understood that policymakers do not understand about these duties and these laws. The laws that we have that are referred to when people are talking about intersectionality, they are laws that emerge around violence and abuse. They are laws that women demanded. And in the 20th century, women, not people who identified as women created the most significant alteration in human organisation in history. And do you know how we did it? We told men they couldn't abuse us anymore. And from about 1858, the divorce rate starts to prop up. And then all of a sudden, at the turn of the century, you've got sociologists who are going, oh fuck, if women are not owned in property, then what the fuck are we going to do about the care economy? Oh shit. Turns out, this is all going to be fine. The 20th century sees the emergence of new aspects of the economy. It sees the emergence of the care economy, which completely does not behave the way that market-oriented institutions do. We see the slow evolution across national borders of laws specifically dealing with domestic abuse, although domestic abuse is only recently a policy goal. And for people like me, I'm one of the first generation that looked after children. And what we are is a natural evolution in citizenship that was never put there by policymakers. No politician ever sat there and said, I don't think that women should be battered anymore. Do you know who did that? Women did. Do you know who said men are not allowed to fuck our kids anymore?
We did.
We did. And do you know what we did? We got up in the 1850s And it wasn't women, you know, it wasn't Emily Pankhurst, it wasn't any feminist icon you know, it was actually the women in your family. It was your grandmothers and your great-grandmothers, and it was all these women who did this. And here's something I know about those systems. They can't be undone. So at the minute, what we have got is a fucking temper tantrum, a big, massive mantrum. The characteristics of trans rights activists are narcissistic abuse. I identify as. That's what it is. I'm going to tell you a secret about narcissistic abuse. You see, when you're noticing it's happening, it's not working. The only time narcissistic abuse works is when you're not noticing it. You ask any victim of narcissistic abuse what happened at the point in time where they became aware of those power dynamics. The minute you are aware of those power dynamics, it's over. Has anybody noticed there are no fucking protesters outside? Yes. Has anybody noticed, there was a meeting in Todmorden in my tiny little town last week, no protesters. Except one narcissistic woman who turned up to make a show of herself, and everybody just went, shut the fuck up. Which is entirely what you need to do. Now, I'm going to tell you what I did after I worked in Keighley.
It's not going to take 10 minutes.
No, it's not. I'm going to really, really hurry up. I swear to God, but you do need to know this. You absolutely need to know this, because this is why we in the UK are absolutely perfectly placed to win this in a reason. America, they're fucked. Canada, I am so glad I do not live in Canada. But in the UK, we can win this because of the structure of these systems. Now, what I did was after, I don't know whether you know, but before the transgender ideology threatened women's rights, austerity just actually rolled back equality for quite a few million women in this country. And in one foul swoop, our jobs were taken, the sectors that we work in were decimated, our cash transfer system was used to remove the ability of women to leave abuse, our women's refuges were attacked, and our child protection system went into meltdown. Again, this is really, really terrible. But actually, what you might not know is that this is an indicator that we are going through a process of institutional redefinition. You cannot abdicate these responsibilities. You can only generate crisis where policymakers are aware that they exist. And at present, policymakers are not aware that they exist, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I went to the London School of Economics and I got a fucking master's degree to find out why they don't know. Because instead of any understanding of these systems that developed in the 20th century, the systems that I have lived in and worked in and spent my whole life with, we've got fucking gender studies and degrees in mansplaining, and we've got queer studies. And the reason that we have these is that they sit smack bang in a wider context of economics that's reliant on synthetic inequality modelling, which is basically neoliberal economics. And the minute you start putting these models into context, they fall apart. I don't know whether you know, ladies, but you are the context that makes these models fall apart. And up until social media, these institutions, the London School of Economics, which I just attended, I'm not particularly proud of it, they existed in a bubble above us. And now, all of a sudden, all those power dynamics, where they were separated from us, and they have these disciplines that sit in this context away from us, that can't happen anymore. And through social media, you are seeing power dynamics play out. And you are seeing these bullshit disciplines of gender studies and queer studies and all these fucking dude bro sociology graduates. My God. I'm an intellectual feminist and I want to punch a turf. You are a dipshit. Shut up. And one more minute. All we have to do to win it in this country, all women have to do, we already have the laws, they're ours. Our mothers and our grandmothers got those laws. We just have to make sure they're fucking applied. We already know. We already know what gender is. We already know the difference between gender and sex. And now we're at the point where trans rights activism is exposed as narcissistic abuse. We can't debate with it, you can't do it, but you can let it demonstrate for you. And these people we could not raise the conversation with austerity about equality being rolled back because we have no power. I had to go to the fucking London School of Economics and get an abusive reflex done in my dissertation so that it's on record because nobody else would. These people are men, so they have power. And they have raised a conversation, they have demanded a conversation. And my favourite strategy in cards is let somebody else raise the stakes and then clear the fucking table. That's what we need to do. Now in England, all we need to do is speak to each other openly and not be afraid. When they threaten to dox you, when they threaten to fire you, fucking torpedo my Twitter account, I don't care. It's a Twitter account. The reason they need to do that is because this ideology falls apart the minute we speak. Our existence kills it. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I went on a bit, but that's what I wanted to say. The US don't have these frameworks. The Canada don't. We do. In England, all we need to do is assert ourselves and say, these are our laws and we can do that. And we just beat this by existing. They're fighting reality. We don't need to fight reality. We are reality. So that's basically it.
Stephanie? I'm going to try and get through as many speakers as possible, and anybody then from the floor,
Let me know when my 5 minutes is up. Hi, I'm Stephanie Davis-Sarai. This is my organisation, Transgender Trend. I want to touch actually on what Sheila was saying about the replacement of the word sex with gender, for people to be aware that this in this country is led by Stonewall in materials for schools, and that homosexuality is being defined by Stonewall and by transgender youth support groups as an old-fashioned medical term, and gay is described as attraction to the same gender and lesbian attraction to the same gender. You will see that in the Stonewall Schools resources, you'll see it in gendered intelligence, you'll see it in the Crown Prosecution Service anti-bullying materials for schools, the replacement of sex and gender. So not only is, biological sex, the erasure of biological sex is the erasure of the female sex, because men are the default sex. It's only the female sex that can be erased. Homosexuality is erased. Heterosexuality won't be, because heterosexuality is the default sexuality. So that's what we're seeing, the erasure of both, and it's very much led by Stonewall and all the LGBT societies groups, transgender youth support groups that are springing up all over the country are promoting this. So what's happening in schools is absolutely crucial, because we are seeing that children are being indoctrinated into the idea from the start that whether you are a boy or a girl is a matter of an internal sense or feeling and not material reality of your biological body. And they're taught this through the gender-bred person and the gender unicorn and various policies in schools and the transgender schools toolkit, the infamous schools toolkits that are going all over the country, most of which are based on the All Sorts toolkit from Brighton and Hove. When we put out our school's toolkit, we should have called it that, but instead it's called Supporting Gender Non-Conforming and Trans-Identified Students in Schools. We have there was a massive targeted harassment campaign against me personally and against Transgender Trend. Stonewall put out a statement saying that it was really damaging. I've never experienced such a tsunami of harassment and abuse and defamation online. What's interesting is that nobody has condemned it. So the Department for Education, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the teaching unions. Every organisation and public body that was approached to denounce it has not done so. It has not been recommended, but it has not been denounced. And the reason for that, I believe, is that it speaks the truth. It is reality. It explains the difference between sex and gender, and nobody can argue with what it says. I'm just going to finish by saying that campaign of harassment was reignited in earnest when we set up the crowdfunder 2 weeks ago, I think, and the crowdfunder experienced an unprecedented level of complaints against us. I'd just like to thank everybody in this room or who is watching this who wrote to crowdfunder to complain about the suspension of our project. Thank you, because it worked. We all did this. We made a difference. We got so many complaints to crowdfunder. They took 6 days of investigation by their legal team. We were cleared of hate. There is no hate in this document, there is only truth. But for an organisation, a platform like crowdfunder, to find us not guilty was a massive, massive victory for truth and for reality, and for, in this case, the protection of children and sensible policies in schools. Please donate. Since we have crashed through our £10,000 target, we're on to our stretch target of £20,000 now. We really need this money. We want to print this resource pack and get it into every school in England. Please help us and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Katina.
Yes, for people who want to find this online, follow us on Twitter at Transgender Trend, look at transgendertrend.com, or go to crowdfunder and find the Transgender Trend Schools Pack project. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatina, and I just want to say thanks Sheila for speaking about the history of the YP, really interesting. I'll try to make this quick. I have some good news. The good news is myself, I invited Sheila, as well as some other women here, to speak to an international human rights lawyer. Now, we can challenge the implementation of self-ID legally. That is because for example, the Scottish Government, in their consultation, they specifically mentioned the YP and Resolution 2048 from the Council of Europe. It's non-binding, but if a state gives it the force of the law, we can mount a legal challenge. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of money, but there's some Scottish women here, and afterwards you can come and speak to me as well if you want to be involved. The other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to make this really clear. This is not about Brexit. I know I'm speaking about Europe, it's not about Brexit. I just wanted to make this clear. Now, we are affected by the Council of Europe resolution because we have signed the European Convention on Human Rights. Whether we Brexit or not, it's a separate issue. So we like the European Convention on Human Rights and we like the Human Rights Act. We need to keep those things and we need to stop them being corrupted by the YP, and that's exactly what is happening. So a few of us have just set up an organisation called ILAW, that stands for International Legal Action for Women. Just like what Magdalene was saying, the point of ILAW is to expose the YP internationally for our sisters. For example, in Canada, look at what has happened. The Human Rights Commission threw them under the bus. They probably didn't even know about the YP. So it's about doing international actions, just what Sheila and Magdalene were saying, lobbying at EU level, speaking to Jo here, she's got some contacts. There's a lot of work to be done. So if you want to be involved in this wider group that we're going to set up, please speak to me. And my colleague Lena just wanted me to mention that obviously we've got the Exemptions in Equality Act, and please see Fair Play for Women. I think I'm just going to leave it there, but I look forward to speaking to you. Thank you.
If you don't know me, I'm Posey Parker. So I was going to try and be eloquent and academic about this, but it really isn't my style. In front of such an esteemed panel, I probably felt miserable anyway. I'm just going to be blunt, brutal and belligerent because that's what I do, and I make no apology for it. Now, a great hero of mine, Christopher Hitchens, for whom I speak no permission to adore, says the only thing that should be upheld at all costs and without qualification is the right of free expression, because if that goes, then so do all other claims of right as well. There's no strict constitutional protection of free speech. It's just about all laws and rights in the UK and that they're enforced by an act of Parliament and thus can be withdrawn by a simple majority. Imagine this. Americans under Trump have more freedom to speak than you do. So my personal boundary on free speech is anything goes, frankly, as long as it isn't a direct incitement to violence. Anything less completely invalidates the entire notion. The law is evolving to be more akin to the Ministry of Truth than the old-fashioned idea of what is right and just. Objective justice has been sacrificed at the altar of the individual. No more is there right and wrong, but there is my right and my wrong. We all fall at the hurdle of offence, and no woman is a race. I'm offended is the new shut up, don't speak, be silent. If we have no right to offend, we lose the ability to speak freely, to share and evolve important ideas. Such is the subjective nature of offence, we will reach a point where the only chance to achieve an inoffensive statement is to barely utter anything at all. The likes of mermaids, gyres, and Belcher Helen, as I like to call him, would like to see the law to be used to stop misgendering. This literally means we could see a woman objecting to a man in a changing room charged with a crime when she openly objects to his penis. Now, I recently had a conversation with Avon and Somerset Police, not West Yorkshire, they interviewed me, and I was told by this female officer that if a trans officer, trans woman, trans-identified male, so if a person with a penis calls himself a woman and arrests someone, he has the right to search that female suspect. Now that's absolute. That's not up for grabs. Now that female suspect is assumed not to be vulnerable enough to request a different officer. But I think we can all see that that really won't happen. That when you're vulnerable, maybe you're prostituted, maybe you're a drug addict and you get arrested, the last thing you're going to do is demand your rights to have a female. So that's something that all of you should contact your local force and demand an FIO, FOI or an FIO. So you should demand a FOI, thank you Jamie, and find out what their policy is, because it's true, and then you can demand that they change it once you tell your local press. Now, throughout the country, women have been trying to meet and find themselves branded hateful, bigoted, and in some cases Nazis. Venues have been cancelled, sometimes with a handy virtue signal to the general public, announcing that they too are happy to stifle free speech. This is incredibly effective silencing, and it perplexes me. What is it so frightening that women are about to talk about? What aren't we allowed to say? The level of scrutiny and fear of women is not new. We've always been, certainly I have, too brazen, too loud, too shrieky, too big for our boots, too obsessed with biology, too keen on victimhood, too ugly, too vain, too old, too slutty, too frigid, too mean, too bitchy, too religiously observant, and every opposite of all of those things. Thank you. Essentially, women have always been told not two men enough for public space. Still, we're here. We dug our heels in, whatever shape or size, and and we will be heard, and we will listen. I can feel the collective relief of being in a room where we do not worry about the truth we fear to speak, sometimes in our everyday life. The most dangerous words are those that penetrate dishonest rhetoric with truth. The explosion is triggered, and the lie that never quite fits so neatly back in its box, it spills out into the air like a fragrant honeysuckle on a summer's day and begs for propagation. We are worker bees here, and I believe Venice is the queen. So we understand in our private lives, and I say we, I mean you, I'm rude and offensive and have no employer. So we have to watch what we say because there are real consequences, social consequences, disciplinary hearings at work, and actually in my case an interview by West Yorkshire's finest. It seems the wider world is moving towards totalitarianism slightly faster than the law. Hate speech is upon us, the law is coming to compel your speech. It's already happening in Canada, and beneath this mask of progressive liberal thinking hides misogyny. Although much like Trudeau's freaky fake eyebrows, the mask is slipping to reveal the monsters. The road to tyranny begins with small steps. Controlling language is the first, second is your thoughts, and before you know it, much of the truth we know will remain unspoken. Now here's my action plan, it's very brief.
That's a very long minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's what my husband says. Go and see your MP, be the squeaky wheel. Don't bother writing, they don't read it, or they get an intern to. Go and see them, make an appointment, go and tell them what's going on and what your fears are. Go into your child's school, find out what they're teaching. Ask your local police force how much money they've spent on diversity training. Ask your local hospital the same. Find out how much your local council has spent on diversity training and what language they're using in official documents. Keep meeting other women. It doesn't matter who is organising, be in a room and don't be afraid to speak the truth. If there are no local ones, then organise one yourself. The amazing women in Cornwall did a really fine job. Keep talking about this to anyone that will listen. Do not submit, do not capitulate, and when they come for your words, remember you remained inconvenient. Thank you.
Comment, Jeremy.
It's only a quick thing, and that's the announcement today that the British Film Institute are using Monroe Bergdorf to headline their Women's Festival, and I think we ought to protest it. That's it. Venice now will tour the floor with the microphone, and I believe Elizabeth is first.
Just to say thanks everyone, that was amazing, and I mean everyone. And the other thing is just to kind of put in a plug for my particular obsession, which is I'm an environmentalist, I'm an eco-activist, and I'm really concerned about big pharma and how they're medicalising every single aspect of our lives. And I hope as part of all our work, we're giving each other a lot of homework tonight, aren't we? We're making each other do a lot more work than we had. But another thing that we should be doing is really investigating who's making the synthetic hormones, who's forcing the synthetic hormones into kids. Because it's not just the trans thing, we're trying to medicalise every aspect of our lives, from when we're born, to giving Ritalin to our kids, to then giving them puberty blockers, to then making sure that we're so fucked up we have to be on antidepressants our whole life, and then, just like destroying our livers or whatever. So Big Pharma's cold dead hand is in this, and we need to start doing the homework and finding out who and lobbying. I don't actually know how. This is the beginning of the thoughts. But another thing that really kind of breaks my heart is estrogenic pollution, which is that because of trans and because of HRT, we're peeing a lot of estrogen, synthetic estrogen, into the water, and that's forcibly transing the fish. And that means that crocodiles and alligators are endangered. It means freshwater fish are endangered. It means we're destroying the world partially because of the trans ideology. So it reaches into lots of things that don't seem immediately connected. So let's do our homework and start fighting on that front as well. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Can I just say something? I think it would be nice to have a proper actual discussion now. If anyone's got any questions for Sheila or for Nicole, yeah? So if anyone want to put their hand up?
I've got a question.
Okay, Louise.
Sheila, is there anything else that you'd like to say that you haven't already said? Because I just love listening to you. Is there anything else you think we need to hear?
Can I just make one comment about the phrase sexual orientation?
Sure.
I think a big problem with it is, it can cover anything at all. The paedophiles are organising, anything can be added on to this. So I think sexual orientation is well dangerous. Not because it means that somebody is innately in anything or not anything. That's not my problem with it. I think we've got to be using language of lesbians and gays and so on. Sexual orientation is a big problem, and the paedophiles are quite organised.
What do we say instead then?
Sorry?
What do we say instead? If we're trying to explain the difference. So, for example, if there are friends of ours who don't understand the difference between gender ideology and, for now...
Lesbian and gay, I think it is actually fine. I don't want any term that includes lesbians in with gay men because our interests are so extraordinarily different, two totally different positions in the hierarchy of sex.
Okay, next question.
Sheila, I think you were going to say something about the money that's going into trans activism, but you probably cut it a bit short because, of time. And I just wondered if you've got anything else to say about the money.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happening, and I've said this before, is that lesbian and gay organisations found that they could not get money just for lesbian and gay rights anymore. Lesbians actually have nothing to do with it. We're just not even considered by any of these organisations. The word lesbian is dropped. We're not anywhere in these gay rights campaigns. We're not. The men have no interest. But the problem was that the lesbian and gay rights organisations, and there are many of them, felt a bit redundant because what were they going to go for next in many countries? Of course, they're working internationally as well, but in individual countries. So they could get money by doing the transgender thing. Right? And there are many individual and other donors like the Open Society Foundation, for instance, who are prepared to give lots of money for the transgender thing. So these organisations like Stonewall have been completely diverted from what they should have been about, because somebody presumably there was a worry of what are we going to do now? How are we going to get any money? How will we survive? And that's a very serious problem, because they can't give up the transgender thing. They can't stop working for that if that is what they're getting funded to do. And it's the same with the international NGOs who are also promoting transgender rights. So I don't know what else I need to say about the money, except that they have huge amounts of money, and we have, as I keep saying, blooming nothing but our rage. And our rage is going to have to be good enough at the moment.
Correct. Hello, it's to anyone on the panel. Basically, I'm seeing in social media, just really in the last few months, and I know this push has been happening for a while, but it's really starting to kind of come through, that they're pushing much harder towards sort of making female what they're going for rather than rather than trans woman. And today we have on Mumsnet a new list of Orwellian regulations about what we can and can't say, and they've outlawed trans-identified male and they've outlawed trans-identified female, and it's actually really difficult to use words to get across what you want to. Mumsnet, it's not the only place, but it's a really important forum for making people aware, for raising consciousness, and I just don't know how we get around this if they strip away the language. And I think Mumsnet are trying to do, to an extent, the right thing, and they also outlawed TERF and CIS, but they said on the flip side, you can't say TIM and TIF and trans-identified male and female. So how do we deal with that?
LGBT. Let's get the L out. They can't touch it, we get the L out.
I think the problem is that Mumsnet is a commercial organisation. They were set up in order to sell things and make money. So they've got a difficulty because the vast majority of those who are on those boards are women, and a lot of them are awfully uppity. All of you who are here, very uppity. I did see that thing about the extraordinary restrictions on language and on free speech. I don't know what to do. I mean, when I wrote gender hurt, I didn't know what language I'm going to use, so I said, men who transgender or male-bodied. I have no idea. I think Tim's perfectly respectable. Is it just that it's an acronym that they don't like it? And they are shutting down and shutting down and shutting down the language. I don't immediately have an answer to that. And I wish I did. And I'm happy, I'd be happy if others were going to discuss this problem, because it's a very, very serious. It shows the extraordinary power of the patriarchy. And it's not just the patriarchy, it's a gay patriarchy as well as a straight patriarchy that I've been talking about tonight. Yeah. They can actually make it impossible for us to use the word woman, to use the word sex, to use the word man, to speak about them. It's a most extraordinary power. Language is basic. We can't have any political analysis. We can't do anything if we don't have the words to use to express ourselves. But I'd be happy to hear anything else about that, because I really think it's a hugely important issue.
Nicole, do you want to say something about that?
Already. Hi, I'm Bara, and I just want to make a couple of points really, rather than ask any questions. Firstly, I was one of these people who was thrown out of the Labour Party, one of the 300 of us who resigned as a result of this Gender Recognition Act, and then simply accepted it. I was absolutely disgusted to be told by the Labour Party, in glee, rubbing their hands, that apparently only 12 of us had resigned, and I'm pretty sure it's many more than that. And they actually phoned me up to ask me if I would reconsider my position and give them some more of my money. After I explained that I'd walked thousands of miles for them, I'd given thousands of pounds, thousands of hours, and I've been a member of the party for 32 years, and it was as a result of what they were doing to me that I was leaving. And I said it's as a result of this Gender Recognition Act. They actually very rudely put the phone down on me. So, like many women in this room as well, I'm politically homeless. I can't belong to the Greens because we're non-men, as far as they're concerned. And so the Lib Dems are even worse at the moment, and so, I don't know who to vote for anymore. That's one thing I'd like to say. Secondly, I have a lot of sympathy with the speaker who interrupted, and I would have listened very much to her. I was one of those people who did have gender dysphoria when I was 16, and some of you might know me, I didn't look like this back then. You might have known the footballer Ian Rush, and I used to get teased by my family for my Ian Rush haircut, and some of us are old enough to remember Ian Rush, playing for Liverpool. And I used to wear men's clothes, and I used to look very masculine. It was as a result of hating my body. I had body dysphoria. And I had body dysphoria as a result of years and years of abuse, of sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse by my family and by my relations. And I was raped, I don't know how many times, every couple of weeks for 6 years as a child. And I hated the body that I had. And I can completely understand why many young women might feel, who maybe have undergone some sort of abuse, perhaps not as bad as that, but feel that they do not want to be women. They don't like the way their bodies are turning. What I do have a serious objection to, that speaker, I would have had much more time for you and given you much more time of day if you hadn't used the most offensive word in the English language. And isn't it ironic that the most offensive word in the English language refers to female genitalia? I find that's really offensive. So, your points were fair, what you were saying was fair, and I would have given you the time of day. But please do not use that word. It is offensive to women to call another woman a cunt. Okay? Another thing I want to say, the last thing I want to say is about Stonewall. I was a volunteer for many years in Stonewall in the early days under Angela Mason and also Anya Palmer as well, who goes on to Twitter as Anya Bike. You might find her there. She's got a lot to say, and it's all very interesting. At the time, Stonewall was an organisation that supported women, and had two very strong women running it and caring for women and putting our concerns first. unfortunately, in the past few years, it's become a trans-dominated organisation. I don't even know whether gay men are anymore. And, I've known so many people in that organisation, and we are now at loggerheads with each other, to the point where, people can't sit in the same room anymore. And when people come out on Twitter, like Graham Linehan and Ricky Gervais and Francis Barber, coming out and supporting and saying, men cannot be women, trans women are male and not female, the barrage of hate and abuse that they get is phenomenal. And so I really applaud anybody who puts their name down on their own Twitter account. I don't. You might find me at the Lady Nevermore on Twitter, that's me, but I won't use my name, my actual name, because of the repercussions at work. I got sent on one of these training courses that Stonewall run. It was so badly run that in the end I ended up telling them, filling in all the gaps in their information, such as the hormone blockers are completely reversible, and all the other misinformation that they are putting out to schools. And I'm ashamed of that organisation, and I'm ashamed of my friends that still have something to do with that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Claire Roti, find me on Twitter. I wanted to talk about the Girl Guides. I don't know how many of you here are parents, and I don't know how many of you have children who go to the guides. I think one of the lessons that I get from these meetings generally is that we can kind of acquire bravery from being all together in this room, but now what we need to do is, when we go back to our home, get involved in civic society, whichever way we can, whether we become a parent governor at school or whether we meet up with other women for coffee and try and talk to them. The guides have got this thing now whereby if you're a boy but you identify as a girl, you are included in the guides. But terrifyingly for me, if you are a girl and you declare yourself non-binary or that you are identifying as a boy, you will be directed to join another organisation. So let that sink in. The girls who most need solidarity from other girls, the girls that are the rough and tumble girls, the girls that want to be with the girls who aren't the girly girls, these are the girls that are in the guides. These are the girls that are at risk, that we all need to be nurturing, that become women with dysphoria, that become, women who have these histories, and, I hear you. We need to be protecting these girls and not allowing their organisations of support to turn them away just because of this transient, rapid onset gender dysphoria, which Stephanie's doing so much fantastic work about. So it also applies to guide leaders. You can be a male, identify as a woman, and then you can become the guide leader that stays in the room with the girls at night. I encourage you to talk to your local guide leaders about this. Find the chinks in the armour. Some of the guide leaders, my girl's guide leader, is signed up to this hook, line and sinker. She is willing to throw girls out of the guides in order to let boys in. It's incredible to me that she would do that. So please, everybody, get involved.
I just wanted to shamelessly plug my badges. I've got some badges for sale that are probably barely legal.
Oh, there's always one, isn't there?
I'm skinned, so that's it.
Hi, just to remind everybody, it's not just the Labour Party. The Conservatives ran the trans inquiry in 2015. There were over 200 submissions to it, which came from trans people, trans groups, women and women's groups. And out of those, they invited about 15 in to give further verbal evidence. Of those 15, I think about 12 were trans groups or trans individuals, and then there was a handful of health professionals. There were no women, there were no women's groups. I just wanted to move on from what Sheila was saying about the Avocado Principals, because the result of listening to trans people about trans issues, resulted in the trans report, which came from the government, the Women and Equalities Commission, which said, I'll take my glasses off now, I can't read. Which said that the Avocado Principals should be applied. I can't read it now, there's enough light. But basically, the trans report. Okay, the Trans report says, we also heard from various quarters the view that the UK government should adopt the overarching principles on trans equality embodied in 2 international declarations, the Avocado Principles on the application of international human rights law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity, adopted by the International Commission of Justice in 2007, and Resolution 2048, Discrimination Against Transgender People in Europe, adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in April 2015. These set out an overarching framework for trans equality in law based on the principle of a universal right for individuals to determine their own gender identity and to have this respected and recognised. That was the Conservative government, the Women and Equalities Commission, and that's what they are suggesting and recommending.
Sorry, I know I've already spoken, but I just wanted to add one thing, right? Maria Miller has fucked up massively. Labour has fucked up massively. There is one central point that will not change in this country at all. When you request a debate about safeguarding in this country, which is what trans people have done, the central stakeholder is real children. The central stakeholder is not imaginary 7-year-old inner children, inner girls. The central stakeholder is real children. This is time limited. All these politicians and organisations have fucked up completely. Because this is not going to change, this is not new. We don't have to ask for this to be the case. These safeguarding procedures will eventually be pushed against the reality of the family court system and the reality of the wider legal context. They're just generating crisis. So Stonewall, I know that Stonewall's trading mermaids, oh my god, mermaids. These charities are all terrible. But this is because we've got a media and elite culture who don't know this. They're about to find this out. But the central stakeholder in a discussion about safeguarding is always children, and our laws are very, very, very sophisticated and very well established and protect children actually quite well, I think. So,
any hands?
I worked in Brussels for a while as a feminist lobbyist, and I was in a network which was called the European Forum of Left Feminists, and we had tons and tons of women involved in it. And at that time, in 1991, they changed the words for the Labour Party women's officer, changed to the European Socialist Group gender officer, and they changed the word for the European Union Women's Rights Unit to the European Women Gender Equality Unit. Within a year, both of the posts were filled by men who had no shame at all. They had no conception that this was a problem. And they then came to me, because I was totally networked in, and had been a feminist already by then for ages, to just pick my brain. And I was quite young, and I thought, oh, fair enough, we're all helping women. That's great, like these men are going to help women, which of course they weren't. They were on massive salaries, and they were speaking on behalf of us. And I really feel like, amongst other things, this is a massive opportunity. This change of words away from women's rights to gender rights is the opportunity for the men who wanted us to shut up to speak on our behalf. And we're seeing it already. They are obsessed with taking over women's spaces and being able to speak on our behalf, and they will have no shame in doing it. And of course, it's going to be mayhem. The other thing I just wanted to say was that it was very interesting, people talking today about how this is a faith, this gender thing is a faith-based, and it's not evidence-based. And people
all vote Tory just because somebody was gender critical. That's taking it a little bit too far. Hey, Andy, do you want to... Are you going to talk?
No, carry on. There's a woman here at the front who would like to...
It's only a little point about dead naming. There's been people deleted were saying that Ian Huntley, the child murderer, apparently has come out trans, so in fact there's no basis. It's one of these stupid stories in the Star. And it strikes me there's a feminist campaign in America to legally prevent any man who's being convicted of crimes against women and children from changing their legal gender. And I think it's something we should try to promote here.
Can I just ask Sheila, would you lead a group to go to CEDAW? Like if we got some money, if we sponsored you, would you be the person to go to CEDAW?
I'm very, very happy to go to CEDAW. I love going to CEDAW. I haven't been for many, many years. I can now, I'm retired. It always used to be right at the beginning of my term, at the beginning of the summer term. But I don't think it's a case of leading. We need organisations, preferably more than one, who are going to try and get the money together to send women. The hotels are very expensive, the airfares are really expensive, but some women have been talking about maybe we could stay, we could find feminists that we could stay with in New York. And I have some idea about how you put on sessions and how you try to raise an issue and all that sort of thing. And I haven't been since, I think, 2003, 2005 or something, but there's some wonderful women there. Women, sort of in their 80s and 90s have been doing that work for like 60 years, and they're just absolutely amazing. And they give good hugs, and they are pretty amazing women. So yes, I think we should get there and stir things up. Organisations like Soroptimists, of course, send people, but the Soroptimists have probably never really worked this issue out. So, but we could join it. Individuals could join it and try and actually raise the issues. You'd be a good person posing, I reckon. There's optimists that like you. So we can do all of that. But yes, we have got to do it, and we have got to organise. And I don't know if I want to lead anything, but I'd be happy to be there.
Okay. Just one minute here.
It's not really a question, really. It's just a sort of a point which, looking at all of this from the outside slightly, but I'm so struck by this overwhelming sense from so many speakers tonight in terms of the sort of erosion of safe spaces and emotional spaces. The thing that's really struck me is a woman spoke earlier and talked about how the constraints on so many of your use of language seem to be pervasive through everything that's been said tonight. But the consequence of that seems to be that it's so difficult, as a result of that, to actually articulate safely and accurately your own ideas. And it's definitely the thing that I'll sort of go home thinking about. And in a way, that, for me, what it sounds like is that is the great and very profound front line that so many people are on, to actually find the sort of power to articulate such clear and thought out and important ideas. So that's good luck to us all, I think.
I wanted to say something very quickly about the Labour Party. I received an email yesterday, even though I must say on record that I did resign as women's officer, and I left the Labour Party on May Day with the 300 plus. I'm sure it was far more than 300. I wasn't found guilty of any transphobia because it doesn't exist. I've never been phobic. There's no such thing as trans, and so I can't be guilty of that. Yes, I received an email yesterday, and having resigned as women's officer last November, saying would I chair the Women's Forum meeting on Friday, because the now women's officer hairdresser can't make it. And well, Liam's too busy. Yeah, he'd be punting the bus fare, wouldn't he? So that's kind of, it just sort of like carries on, that you kind of make a stand and and the world just carries on around you. Young women and dysphoria or being unhappy with their bodies. There are more instances now of young women who are deciding that they want to be boys because of the level of sexual abuse. And they feel that if they become boys, that they're less likely to be abused. And that's something that we really do need to push and expose more of, because they are sort of like genuine sort of like cases, and my heart breaks that young women are every day put in that sort of position or feel that way. Stonewall. Well, my dealings with Stonewall happened in the very late sort of like 90s. Ruth Hunt wasn't about then, and it was a very different sort of organisation. However, I've never particularly liked it. I think it's all been very corporate, not run like a charity. And now I see it as a friend of mine would describe it as the clitorati. You have this, which I've never known in sort of, I'm 53 now, I've been a lesbian all my life. I've never seen a sort of hierarchy of lesbians before in my life. And it seems to be that, if you've got now money and power or whatever, you're put on this little pedestal and you're, happy clappy, and Dawn Butler comes to all your award ceremonies, and Dawn Butler gets an award from Linda Riley at the Diva Magazine Awards, and Linda Riley works for Dawn Butler, and Linda Riley is a very rich woman. I just feel that she is director of the Yorkshire Ripple Museum in London, which she tries to keep very quiet. You can find that information quite easily if you just Google. Ruth, now Stonewall, it's all about the money. There's a huge investment in trans, whether it's to do with surgery, pharmaceutical, and we all know it's all about power and whatever else, and just men reinventing themselves. So Stonewall, let's get the L out of LGBT, or let's get the T out, quite frankly. I don't know what, I don't see why we have to sort of like leave our, because it only used to be when, we were around first off, L and G, so let's get the T out, because quite frankly, it's like dragging a dead corpse along with us, but well, it's all take, isn't it? They're feeding off us, and I'm not going to talk about parasites or anything. No, definitely not. We won't go there. And one last thing is councils. The end of last week, myself and a couple of other people discovered that councils up and down the country had slipped in gender instead of sex in protected characteristics. I then, on Friday, urged people to, via sort of like Twitter, to check their own local council policies or whatever on this, and to write and challenge them. Anyway, another group has sort of taken that on board and kind of now running with it. That's fine.
But it's not good enough, and what they're doing is they're just telling the councils off for changing policy for the last 10 years. What they're not doing is telling the people who've looked at the council websites for the equality policy to follow that it's not okay to have non-sex-based provisions when swimming pools have been a major problem. Women have lost the fitness regimes that even the doctors have given them.
Well, this is something that is very concerning, because it's not only to do with leisure facilities and facilities that women would, we're talking about refuges here, that if women then see in that policy that they are trans inclusive, that really really is a real sharp kick in the teeth, isn't it? But women then are thinking, oh God, well, you know, I'm stuck with, I can't get out of this situation because if I do go to a refuge, then I'm likely to be, you know, alongside a man. And that's not good enough. And I know, you know, there's somebody on, who was on a councillor for Cambridge, who is still very chuffed the fact that he managed to change their policy 8 years ago. You know, so for 8 years, Cambridge's policy has included gender and trans inclusion, which is not a protected characteristics, and heads do need to roll, really. This is really, really unacceptable. Anyway.
Okay, I'm just going to say a few things. I think we've had a great meeting. I think we've had enough. When the live stream gets turned off, I'm going to tell you where we're going afterwards. If you're still up for a drink and a chat.
We are really
Yeah, everyone up for that? I want to say thank you. I'm not going to say where we are on the live stream, but I also want to say thank you so much to the venue who've done an amazing job in this beautiful room. I want to say thank you to the women who are here tonight who were involved in our very first meeting at Speakers Corner on 13th of September of last year. And thank you all for coming. A lot of people say on Mumsnet that you have to be really brave to come to one of our meetings, and I'm sorry, I don't think we're brave. I think we're just doing the right thing, and we've got to just keep on doing it. I thought it was brilliant what happened in Cornwall last weekend with Cozy, that the group pulled out, but they carried on, and now it seems that there's a whole feminist, Southwest feminist network that's grown out of that, and that's what we need. We need feminist networks in every single corner of the country, Great Britain and Ireland and all over the world. So do you want to turn it off now?
I just want really, you know, I think Venice, you know, she doesn't like the attention and the sort of, you know, accolades. But honestly, really, I mean, apart from sort of, you know, I don't know, a few of us having conversations with Venice along the way, she does everything on her own, you know. And I must say, it is true, Venice.
Yeah, it is.
I must say that you know, it's absolutely remarkable, you know, due to venues wanting to pull, about all the, you know, the grief and the hatred and whatever else.
But we're pushing it forward now. Like, it's been since September, we've had 7 meetings, and tonight there was no protest from trans activists. We just, you know, we did the meeting point, we protected the venue because they were trying to find out where the venue was, and I was trying to like pretend it was up the road, and I think it kind of foxed them. And then there were people also within this organisation who were unhappy with us having it, but I'm really pleased with the organisation for carrying on. And you know, we just got to keep doing it because what did you say in your speech? Was that you can't punch all of us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good night.